Bullets slammed into the canyon walls, seals pinned down and seconds from being wiped out. Radios screamed, "We're surrounded!" And command had no reinforcements ready. It should have been the end. Then the roar of a single machine gun erupted from the ridge. Not a ranger, not a sniper, just the quiet base driver everyone dismissed. In 3 hours of non-stop fire, she tore through 38 enemy fighters and flipped the ambush on its head. How does a soldier nobody trusted become the only reason an entire patrol survived? And what happened when she returned to base? Facing court-martial or becoming a legend? This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The radio screamed like a living thing. "Contact! Heavy contact!" The words tore through static, chopped apart by automatic fire. Another voice overlapped, ragged and frantic. "We're surrounded. 30 plus multiple angles. We can't." Then a scream cut off mid-breath. Silence slammed down harder than the gunfire. Camp Resolute froze. Soldiers halfway to the chow line halted with trays in hand. Mechanics dropped wrenches. The clatter rang across the yard. Even the generators seemed to hum lower, as if the whole base held its breath. The comm speakers kept spitting fragments of violence, explosions snapping like steel beams breaking, the flat stutter of rifles, voices vanishing into static like men being swallowed whole. Private First Class Jodie Walker sat in her armored SUV, still strapped in from her last run. She had barely turned the key off when the patrol's dying voices filled her headset. Her chest tightened with every burst of gunfire on the line. She didn't need coordinates. She knew exactly where Echo 6 had gone, the narrow cut through the eastern ridge, the road hemmed in by jagged rock walls. She'd driven officers through that pass a dozen times, each turn etched into her muscle memory. Everyone knew it was a kill box waiting to happen. And now it was happening. Another voice shrieked through the interference. "They're everywhere! Close range! Oh God! RPG!" The transmission dissolved into a hollow blast, the kind that didn't just rattle the speakers, but seemed to shake the bones of anyone listening. Jodie's pulse spiked. Lieutenant Mason Reed, Sergeant Victor Kane, Corporal Ethan Cole, 12 men in total. She saw their faces, the casual nods in the mess hall, the smirks when she passed with her keys dangling. Not one of them had ever looked at her as an equal. She was the driver, the shuttle, the girl behind the wheel. Now those same men were being butchered. The quick reaction force was forming, but it was chaos. Officers yelling, runners sprinting to the armory, men fumbling with body armor. Every second bled like an artery cut wide open. Echo 6 didn't have minutes. They might not even have 60 seconds. That's when it happened. The dam inside her snapped. The words of one officer, muttered just hours earlier, hissed back into her skull. "The day she touches a gun is the day we all regret." Her blood turned to fire. Jodie ripped the seatbelt free, shoved the door so hard it rebounded against the frame and hit the ground running. Her boots spat gravel as she sprinted for the armory. Inside, Specialist Rojas looked up from his clipboard. "Walker, you're not assigned. I need the saw," she cut him off, voice sharp enough to draw blood. Rojas blinked, confused. "What? You're not cleared for—" "They're dying!" she barked. It wasn't a plea. It was a verdict. Her eyes locked on his, wide and furious, the kind of stare that promised she'd tear through him if he stood in her way. His hand twitched toward the rack almost involuntarily. Locker 3, top shelf. She yanked it open, metal groaning, and dragged the M249 free. 17 pounds of steel and fury dropped into her arms, the belt draped like a serpent. She slung it across her chest, seized 3 ammo boxes, and stormed back into the blinding sunlight. Behind her, Rojas stammered, "Walker, wait! You don't have orders!" but she was already gone. She threw the gear into the passenger seat, climbed in and twisted the ignition. The SUV roared alive, engine howling. Dust blasted behind her as she slammed into first gear. The two guards at the gate stepped into the road, rifles half raised, confusion plastered across their faces. "Stop! You need authorization!" She didn't ease off the gas. One guard tried again, desperation cracking his voice. "Walker, don't be stupid!" She leaned out the window, eyes blazing, hair whipping in the wind. Her words were low but lethal. "Move, or I drive through you." The look on her face turned their blood cold. They stepped aside. The barrier arm clanged up just as her SUV blasted through, tires shrieking against the asphalt. Camp Resolute shrank behind her in seconds. Ahead, a black column of smoke marked the valley like a signal flare from hell. Her hands clenched the wheel. The vehicle bucked hard over ruts, suspension groaning. The M249 rattled against the seat beside her. She drove faster, the armored frame bouncing like a boulder over loose earth. Every bump jarred her teeth, but she kept pressing the accelerator. Her chest burned with a strange mix of fear and clarity. She had no illusions. This was no training drill, no staged convoy. This was life against death, and she was about to roll into the middle of it alone. The radio on her dash still hissed faintly. A fragment came through, Victor Kane's voice, hoarse, half swallowed by gunfire. "We can't hold. We're running out of—" Then silence again. Jodie slammed her palm against the steering wheel, a guttural sound tearing out of her throat. She'd never hated the waiting, the dismissals, the condescension more than in that instant. Every smirk, every offhand comment had built to this, her moment, her choice, her war. She shifted gears, engine screaming louder. The SUV surged over the ridge, her eyes locked on the smoke boiling from the valley floor. The kill zone was waiting, and so was she. The road clawed at her tires, a strip of dirt and broken stone that punished every rotation of the wheels. Jodie forced the accelerator down anyway. The armored SUV bellowed in protest, suspension squealing as it bounded over gullies and jagged ridges. Each impact rattled her spine, but she clenched the wheel harder, forcing the beast forward. The smoke grew taller as she closed the distance, a twisting black column that smeared the blue sky. Beneath it came the flashes, sharp orange bursts, muzzle fire strobing in the canyon. The fight wasn't just raging, it was eating itself alive. She reached for the M249 with one hand, dragging it across the passenger seat until the heavy weapon clunked against her thigh. With her free hand, she snapped open an ammo box, fed the belt into the receiver, and yanked the charging handle. Metal slammed forward with a predatory clack. The sound felt like a heartbeat syncing with her own. The SUV bucked again, nearly pitching her forward. She gritted her teeth and steadied the gun against the seat. No time for neat preparations. She would be ready the moment she stopped. A shadow moved in the rocks ahead, then another. Figures crouching low, rifles glinting. Her stomach dropped. A forward screen, enemy scouts planted along the road. 3 of them broke cover, weapons rising. Jodie snapped the wheel. The SUV swerved hard, stones exploding under the tires. Bullets slammed against the frame, metallic thunks hammering like fists on a steel door. One round spiderwebbed the corner of her windshield. Another ricocheted off the hood. She floored it. The lead fighter braced his rifle, eyes wide, too slow. The front bumper hit him square, hurling his body into the air like a rag doll. The other 2 scattered, one diving for the ditch, the other leaping for the rocks. She kept the wheel steady, heart pounding so hard it felt like her ribcage might crack. Adrenaline blazed through her, but her hands didn't tremble. Her grip was iron. Another figure rose on the ridge, RPG on his shoulder. "Not today," she hissed. She jerked the wheel, skidding the SUV broadside. Gravel exploded in a cloud. The fighter staggered at the sudden angle, tried to pivot, too late. Her hand shot to the sidearm strapped at her thigh. She drew, aimed through the window and fired twice. The man crumpled, the launcher clattering down the slope, warhead unfired. Jodie holstered the pistol without looking. Both hands returned to the wheel, wrenching it straight as the SUV barreled forward again. The valley entrance loomed, narrow jaws of stone leading into the kill zone. Through the dust haze, she could see more fighters positioned on the ledges. Their rifles spat sparks downward at unseen targets below. The trapped patrol. Her breath rasped hot in her throat. The temptation clawed at her. Slam the brakes, open fire right here, pour rounds until the barrel glowed. But she forced herself to wait. Timing mattered. A burst of tracer fire whipped across her hood, inches above the windshield. Instinct screamed at her to duck, but she didn't lift her foot. She needed height. She needed the angle. The road curved upward to a ridge overlooking the canyon mouth. She yanked the SUV into the turn, tires shrieking, chassis groaning as the heavy vehicle clawed its way up. The engine howled, gears grinding like teeth. Rocks tumbled away under the wheels, but the SUV surged higher, clawing for dominance over the battlefield. Below, the ambush unfolded in full view. 2 Humvees crippled, one already burning. Black smoke oozed upward, mixing with the stench of gunpowder. The survivors of Echo 6 were huddled behind the wreckage, pinned by fire from every direction. Fighters clung to the rocks like carrion birds, spitting bullets down into the kill box. Jodie's jaw locked. The scene carved itself into her mind like acid on steel. She could almost feel the weight of their desperation pressing on her chest. She wrenched the wheel, sending the SUV sliding sideways into a controlled skid. Dust erupted as the vehicle screeched to a halt along the ridge. In the silence that followed the screech, she shoved the M249 forward, setting the bipod against the hood. Her fingers moved with brutal efficiency, feeding the belt across the tray, chambering the first round. The gun was alive now, heavy and hungry, aimed down into the canyon. Her pulse slowed, focus narrowing to a razor edge. She could hear the distant rattle of rifles, the crack of single shots, the shouted commands echoing off stone. She could smell the acrid sting of smoke on the wind. And she could see them. Men who had written her off, crouched in desperation, seconds away from being cut down. Her breath steadied. Her finger slid to the trigger. The kill zone had no idea what was coming. The M249 came alive with a roar that swallowed the canyon. The opening burst, ripped from the muzzle like a thunderclap, a streak of red tracers knifing through the haze. One fighter on the rocks never even flinched. 1 second he was leaning over his rifle, spitting fire into the patrol below. The next his body jolted and folded sideways, ripped apart in the storm of rounds. Jodie pivoted the barrel, finger pulsing the trigger in disciplined bursts. 5 to 7 rounds at a time, the rhythm drilled into her muscles from training ranges she had thought she'd never use. Another fighter jerked backward, chest exploding red, rifle clattering from dead hands. The sound was deafening, metallic, a chainsaw of war chewing the air. Each belt-fed cycle rattled her bones, the weapon bucking against its bipod like it was alive and ravenous. Down in the canyon, heads snapped upward. The trapped Americans froze for half a second, eyes wide, hearing a machine gun hammering not from their enemies, but from above, from the ridge behind them. "Who the hell?" Victor Kane's voice cracked over their squad net, disbelief carrying even through static. Lieutenant Mason Reed, crouched low behind the smoking Humvee, risked a glance. His gaze tracked the stream of tracers cutting into enemy positions, following the line back to the ridge. His stomach dropped. "That's Walker? Walker?" Kane shouted back, ducking as a bullet ricocheted sparks off the vehicle. "The driver, Walker?" "Doesn't matter," Reed snapped, adrenaline spiking. "Whoever it is, move! Push forward!" The canyon detonated into chaos. Jodie kept firing, her breath ragged but steady, finger feathering the trigger. Fighters scrambled along the rocks, caught between angles, unable to decide where death was coming from first. Some tried to swing their rifles up toward her ridge. Too slow. She raked them with suppressive fire, each burst kicking up plumes of rock and dirt, tearing men from cover. The SUV shuddered as bullets slammed into it. The armored plating thudded like a drumline of fists. One round spiderwebbed the bulletproof glass inches from her face. She didn't blink. Her father's voice echoed in her head, memories from the Montana ranch where she had grown up. "When you're outnumbered, you don't back up. You hit harder. You stay aggressive. You make them afraid to breathe." She shifted aim, poured a burst into a cluster of 3 fighters perched high on the ridge opposite her. 2 went down instantly. The third dove for cover, weapons slipping from his hands. The belt rattled empty. She yanked a fresh line of rounds, slammed the feed tray open, dropped the belt, and snapped it shut again. Her fingers moved with brutal precision, like they had been waiting her entire life for this moment. Below, Echo 6 took the chance. Reed barked orders, voice sharp, pulling his men into a staggered line. "User fire! Advance!" They surged from behind the wreckage, rifles barking, finally fighting back instead of cowering. The ambush that had been a death trap turned suddenly into a crossfire. Enemy fighters caught between the high ground gunner and the rallying Americans faltered, their momentum breaking. Jodie's world shrank to iron sights and targets. A fighter with an RPG crawled into position on the far slope. She swung, squeezing the trigger. The burst ripped through him before he could align the launcher. His body flopped sideways, the rocket sliding harmlessly down the rocks. A bullet snapped past her cheek, close enough she felt its heat graze her skin. She jerked her head instinctively, heart hammering, but her hands never left the weapon. She pressed harder into the hood, using the SUV's engine block as her shield. The smell of burning oil and cordite wrapped around her. Another magazine clattered empty. She reloaded again, hands slick with sweat, fumbling for half a second before slamming the belt home. A scream below, Corporal Ethan Cole firing from a kneeling stance, cutting down a fighter scrambling through the smoke. His eyes flicked upward, saw the lone figure on the ridge hammering the machine gun. For the first time since the ambush began, his lips curled into something like hope. "They've got cover!" he yelled. "Push, damn it, push!" Jodie didn't hear him. The canyon's roar drowned everything. She was locked in her own storm, every sense wired to the weapon's rhythm, every thought narrowed to the next target, the next threat, the next pull of the trigger. Her SUV shook again, this time harder. She risked a glance and saw a spray of sparks dance across the armored flank. Enemy rounds hammered the side panel, leaving craters in the paint. One more burst spidered across the windshield. Another struck the mirror, shattering it into glittering shards. She gritted her teeth. "Come on, hold together for me." The SUV groaned, but it held. She shifted her stance, leaning harder into the bipod. Another enemy squad tried to regroup on the far side of the canyon, 5 men moving together, rifles tight to shoulders. She tracked them with the muzzles squeezed. The burst chewed through them, blood mist spraying, 2 falling instantly, another clutching his leg before a second stream of rounds ended him. The survivors tried to scatter. She cut them down. More tracers spat across the valley. Echo 6 had seized the moment, rifles and carbines barking in unison. The canyon that had been their tomb was now an arena of their resurgence. Victor Kane shouted over the squad net, his voice ragged but exultant. "Whoever's up there, you just bought us our lives!" Reed's answer was tight, controlled, but thick with awe. No, that's Walker, the goddamn driver. Jodie reloaded again, body moving on instinct. Her hands shook now, not from fear, but from the sheer violence of the recoil and the adrenaline ripping through her veins. The barrel glowed faintly red, heat shimmering from it in waves. Her shoulder throbbed where the stock slammed against it, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. Bullets chewed the dirt inches from her arm. She ducked lower, shifted the weapon sideways, and blind-fired a burst across the slope. The rounds shredded stone, sending shards ricocheting into the enemy position. Screams followed. Then she saw it. Another RPG, this time closer, 40 meters down the ridge, a fighter kneeling, launcher resting on his shoulder, his face twisted with grim focus as he locked onto her SUV, her chest seized. If he fired, the blast would tear through the vehicle, through her, through the machine gun. She didn't think, she didn't aim. She swung the M249 from the hip and slammed the trigger. The burst caught him center mass. He convulsed, the rocket tumbling from the tube, rolling harmlessly onto the dirt. Jodie exhaled hard, breath fogging the cracked windshield. Below, Reed's squad surged again, closing the distance, rifles barking in lethal rhythm. The enemy faltered, their fire thinning under the relentless pressure from both angles. Jodie's voice finally tore loose, a hoarse growl lost in the thunder of her gun. "Come on, you bastards! Come on!" Her finger kept pulsing, belt after belt chewing through the feed tray. The canyon was no longer theirs, it was hers. The canyon turned on her. The moment Echo 6 pushed forward under her cover, the enemy shifted. Muzzles that had been trained down into the kill box now swung toward the ridge where she was dug in. Dozens of rifles cracked at once, their bullets converging into a screaming hailstorm. The SUV shuddered under the onslaught. Armor panels rang like a struck bell, dents blooming across the steel skin. Rounds spider-webbed the windshield until cracks laced it like shattered ice. A mirror sheared off in a burst of sparks. Jodie pressed tighter behind the engine block, cheek mashed into the warm steel, eyes locked through the iron sights. Her pulse hammered, but her hands were steady. The M249 bucked against her shoulder, spitting fire down into the rocks where enemy silhouettes flickered between cover. They wanted her silenced. They wanted the high ground cleared. Over her headset, Mason Reed's voice barked through static. "Walker, you're too exposed! Fall back!" She ignored him. Pulling back meant death. Pulling back meant giving the ambushers their advantage again. Another stream of rounds chewed the hood near her arm, sparks stinging her skin. She hissed but didn't move. Instead, she shifted her aim by inches, found the muzzle flash that betrayed her attacker, and squeezed. The machine gun thundered, tracers ripping across the gap. The hostile's rifle clattered from his hands as his body went limp, sliding down the rock face. The M249's barrel glowed now, heat shimmering off the steel. She could smell the metal burning, a bitter, acrid tang that clawed the back of her throat. The belt rattled empty. She snapped the feed tray open, fumbling only once before slamming a fresh belt into place. Her fingers burned against the hot metal, but she ignored the pain. She yanked the charging handle, slammed the tray shut, and fired again. Below, Echo 6 pressed harder. Victor Kane's hoarse shout cut through the cacophony. "Push! Push! While she's got them pinned!" The squad moved like a tide, rifles flashing, grenades thumping into enemy nests. For the first time since the ambush started, the balance shifted. But the enemy wasn't done. Movement caught her eye. Two fighters scrambling up the slope toward her, closing fast. She swung the barrel, unleashed a burst, but they were already weaving, using the rocks as shields. Her rounds chewed the stone inches behind them. She cursed, slamming the bipod legs closed and hauling the M249 against her chest. She swung left, braced against the hood. and fired again. One of the attackers collapsed, shredded mid-stride. The other lunged behind a boulder, safe for now. Then came the sound she dreaded, the hollow whump of a grenade launcher. Her eyes widened. The grenade arced upward, a dark speck against the smoke-filled sky. She had less than a second. She dove sideways. Gravel scraped her arms raw as she hit the ground, rolling hard. The grenade slammed into the SUV's hood and exploded, the blast deafening, metal shrieking as it tore open. Shrapnel whined through the air, shards slicing across her forearm and shoulder. She gritted her teeth, biting down a scream. Her SUV, her shield, was burning now, smoke pouring from the shredded hood. She pushed herself up, ears ringing, vision swimming. The enemy who had fired was reloading, fumbling another round into the tube. Jodie swung the M249 from the hip and squeezed. The burst kicked so hard it nearly tore the weapon from her grip, but the rounds tore through him. His body jolted and collapsed, the grenade tube clattering beside him. Her chest heaved, her arms trembled from the impact and the weight, but she didn't stop. She staggered back to the SUV, propped the smoking weapon against what was left of the hood, and kept firing. The canyon was a maelstrom. Echo 6 had broken their paralysis, firing upward as they advanced. Their bullets cut down fighters scrambling for new cover, each shot fueled by the surge of hope the high ground had given them. Jodie matched their tempo. Every time one of her comrades surged forward, she laid down a burst that suppressed enemy positions. Every time a muzzle flash lit up in her direction, she answered with heavier fire, but the enemies weren't panicking anymore. They were adapting. 3 of them crawled into a new position along the ridge opposite her. Coordinated fire raked across her perch, bullets slamming inches from her head, forcing her lower. Another RPG wielder appeared farther back, fumbling to load. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She fired at the trio, cutting down one, forcing the others back. But the RPG was still coming. "Walker!" Reed's voice tore through the radio. "You can't take all of it! Pull back, that's an order!" Her lips peeled back in a snarl, then ordered them to stop shooting at me. She shifted, aimed, fired. The RPG operator reeled back as the burst tore into him, the warhead falling harmlessly into the dirt. Her weapon hissed like a live furnace, heat radiating from the barrel until the air above it shimmered in distorted waves. Every squeeze of the trigger felt like forcing a dying beast to roar again, and she knew the steel was close to its breaking point. But stopping was not an option. To let the gun rest would mean silence, and silence here meant death. She worked the feed tray with blistered fingers, reloading once more. Her hands moved faster now, almost frantic, though each motion sent shocks of pain up her arms. Cuts from shrapnel had split her knuckles and burned lines across her palms, but adrenaline kept them steady. Her sleeve hung in tatters, soaked dark with blood, fabric clinging wetly to her skin. Still, she forced the belt into place, slammed the cover shut, and wrenched the charging handle with a hiss of pain she refused to acknowledge. The canyon answered with a new sound, not the enemy's fire, but the pounding rhythm of boots on stone. Echo 6 was pushing forward, seizing the momentum she had carved for them. Their advance thundered through the valley, grenades clattering into enemy holes and exploding with sharp, muffled thuds that rolled across the rocks like distant thunder. Rifle fire cracked sharp and close now, their line driving higher, their voices shouting over the chaos. "Push, damn it, push!" someone cried, and then Victor Kane's roar cut through, raw and fierce. "They're breaking! Keep pushing!" Jodie blinked hard, sweat streaming into her eyes until the world blurred into streaks of grey and red. She dragged her forearm across her brow, smearing soot and blood, forcing clarity back into her vision. She saw it then, the enemy beginning to falter, their return fire ragged, their movements slower. She realized she wasn't just holding them at bay anymore, she was grinding them down, breaking them piece by piece. Then came a sharper sting. the angry hiss of rounds tearing closer than ever. One bullet kissed across her cheek, searing a hot line of fire down her skin. She jerked, vision flashing white for an instant. Another slammed into the ground beside her, exploding dirt into her eyes and mouth. She coughed hard, spit grit, and rage flared hotter than pain. A roar ripped from her throat, primal and raw, a sound pulled from the depths of survival and fury. She slammed the stock into her shoulder, leaned into the burning weapon, locked her blurred sights onto the nearest fighter, and pulled. The burst hammered into him, rounds smashing his body backward into the rocks. He crumpled, limp before he hit the ground. The belt rattled empty again. She barely noticed. Her arms moved on instinct now, muscle memory built from training and sharpened by necessity. The new box snapped open, fresh brass rattled into place. The tray slammed down, the charging handle yanked with a hiss of scorched flesh. Exhaustion screamed through her body like wildfire, her lungs ragged, her arms trembling, but her will was iron. She refused to falter. The SUV groaned under another volley, armor screeching as bullets slammed into its carcass. Flames licked higher from the hood, black smoke curling thick, swallowing the air around her. The vehicle shuddered like a dying beast, and she knew the truth. It wouldn't shield her much longer. But knowledge didn't matter. She understood the odds, the fragility of her cover, the inevitability of collapse, and still she didn't care, because this moment was no longer about survival. It wasn't about crawling out alive or waiting for reinforcements. It was about refusing to give ground, about making sure they didn't win. Then, like a shift in the wind, the pattern of fire changed. The relentless pressure slackened, the incoming rounds fewer, scattered. She lifted her head, squinting through the smoke, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Across the canyon she saw them, enemy fighters pulling back from their positions. Some staggered, dragging wounded comrades. Others scrambled in panic, abandoning cover they had held with such confidence only minutes earlier. Bodies already littered the rocks, sprawled in grotesque stillness. Smoke curled over shattered stone, the battlefield scarred by her fury. They were retreating, and she was still standing. They weren't regrouping, they were running. Her chest rose and fell in jagged bursts. The machine gun sagged in her grip, barrel glowing like a brand. Her uniform was torn, blood streaking down her arms, sweat soaking every inch, but she was still standing, still firing. Below, Echo 6 surged into the newly abandoned cover, their rifles chasing the retreating fighters. The ambush that had been a massacre in waiting was collapsing, shattered by one woman's refusal to let it stand. Jodie pressed the trigger one last time, sending a burst into the fleeing silhouettes. One toppled, the others scattered. She released the grip, smoke curling from the barrel, and exhaled hard. Her SUV was ruined, the hood burning, armor dented like tin. Her body screamed from burns, cuts, bruises, but she was alive. And Echo 6 was alive. The firestorm had not consumed her. Not yet. Smoke clung to the ridge like a curtain. The SUV burned behind her, flames licking out of the torn hood, black plumes twisting skyward. Jodie Walker stood in front of it, machine guns slung across her chest heaving like she had swallowed fire. The battlefield hadn't gone quiet, not yet. Gunfire still cracked from the canyon below, Echo 6 trading rounds with stragglers who refused to break. The air was hot with cordite, thick with grit and ash. But something shifted. A subtle rhythm in the chaos. The sharp crack of rifles was joined by a different sound, boots scrambling on stone closer than before. Her gut twisted. They were coming for her. She turned sharply, scanning the slope to her left. Shapes moved in the haze, 7 of them, dark silhouettes fanning out, rifles ready. They weren't firing down at Echo 6. They were climbing, angling, hunting her. For a heartbeat, time fractured. Jodie's pulse faltered, a sharp throb in her chest that almost drowned out the chaos. Her SUV lay gutted and smoking behind her, its armor shredded, its protection gone. The only barrier between her and death was grit, raw instinct, and a machine gun that felt heavier with every passing second. Her skin burned where cuts stung fresh, muscles trembled from hours of recoil, and every nerve screamed at her to collapse. But collapse wasn't an option. The cold paralysis cracked, shattered, and flared into fire. Her vision narrowed into a tunnel of rage and determination. She ripped the M249 into position, bracing the stock against her bruised shoulder. Her arms wavered under the weapon's weight, trembling as if gravity itself had turned against her, but she locked her elbows, gritted her teeth, and forced steel into her stance. Smoke shifted, and the first figure burst through, a fighter charging headlong, rifle raised, eyes burning with the certainty of the kill. Jodie didn't flinch. She squeezed. The gun answered like a thunderclap. The burst slammed into him, the tracers carving red streaks across the haze. His chest erupted mid-stride, momentum carrying his broken body forward until he hit the dirt with a strangled cry that cut off as he twitched once, then went still. Shouts rose immediately, harsh and urgent. The others spread wide, boots pounding against stone, rifles spitting wild bursts as they tried to box her in. A round slammed into the ground near her face, showering grit and hot fragments across her cheek. Jodie dropped low, chest scraping rock, then rolled hard to the side. Her back slammed against a jagged boulder, lungs burning as she dragged in air thick with smoke and powder. The machine gun was already coming up again, her body moving faster than thought. She leaned out from cover, eyes narrowed, and squeezed another burst. The muzzle flashed bright in the smoke, tracers screaming across the slope. Stone exploded into sparks, dust flying as rounds chewed the ridge. One enemy jolted backward, chest punched open, blood spraying in an arc before he collapsed. Another stumbled mid-sprint, tripped and scrambled desperately for cover, firing blind and wild as he fell. 5 left. The belt rattled dry, the gun coughing empty. The sound made her stomach twist. "Damn it!" she hissed, already reaching. Her fingers clawed at the ammo box strapped to her vest. The metal edges cut into her scraped knuckles, her hands trembling from fatigue, but she dragged it free. Every second felt like an eternity as bullets smacked into her boulder, the stone splintering under the onslaught. Her body screamed to stop, to rest, to just give in. But her mind was a blade, honed sharper with every life depending on her. She snapped the feed tray open, shoved the belt into place, slammed it down, and yanked the charging handle back. The steel burned her raw palm, searing pain shooting up her arm. She ignored it. Pain meant alive. She popped back up, weapon shouldered, teeth bared. The M249 roared again, brass flying like coins, the belt rattling furiously. Sparks leapt across the rocks as tracers stitched bright lines into the slope. Another enemy spun backward, crimson spraying from his shoulder as he collapsed in a heap. 4 left. They learned fast. No more reckless charges. 2 dropped to their stomachs, laying down heavy suppressing fire, bullets hammering her boulder in deafening rhythm. The other 2 ghosted along the edges, flanking, trying to trap her. Fragments stung her face as stone chipped under the impacts. She pressed her cheek against the rock, grit cutting into her skin. Her jaw tightened until her teeth ached. She couldn't let them pin her. Her eyes darted right. 5 meters downslope, another slab of rock jutted from the earth, broad enough to shield her flank. It was close enough to risk. She sucked in a breath, braced herself, and moved. She exploded from cover in a sprint, boots hammering the dirt. Bullets sliced the air beside her head, snapping past her ears like whips. One grazed her sleeve, ripping fabric and burning a hot line across her arm. She clenched her teeth against the pain, legs pumping harder. She dropped into a slide, momentum carrying her across gravel that shredded her knees through the fabric. The impact of her shoulder against the new rock rattled her teeth. She coughed, lungs on fire, but she was alive, shielded for another few seconds. Alive and ready to kill again. She came up firing, the machine gun barking, tracers cutting arcs through the haze. One of the suppressors screamed, body jerking as rounds tore through his chest. 3 left. They hesitated now, eyes flicking between her and the advancing Americans below. She saw the doubt, saw the crack forming. She pressed, she surged up from cover, weapon braced and unleashed another burst. One fighter dove too slow, rounds ripped into him, flipping him onto his back. He didn't move again. 2 left. The survivors shouted something in a language she didn't understand, one gesturing desperately. They weren't pressing anymore, they were breaking. But she didn't let them. She advanced, boots pounding dirt, M249 spitting fire in controlled bursts. Her face was streaked with sweat, blood and soot, eyes blazing like coals. The last 2 turned and ran. She didn't stop firing. She stitched a line of tracers across their backs. One fell instantly. The other made it 3 more steps before he collapsed, sliding limply down the rocks. Silence bled back in, thick and heavy. Jodie stopped, chest heaving, smoke curling from the overheated barrel. The weapon sagged in her grip, but she refused to lower it, eyes scanning for any more movement. Nothing. The slope was littered with bodies. 7 down. Her own body trembled with exhaustion, blood dripping from cuts along her arms, sweat soaking her uniform. She felt hollowed out, carved raw by adrenaline, but beneath it burned something harder, sharper, resolve. Below, Echo 6 had surged past the ruined Humvees, rifles barking as they cleared the last enemy nests. Their voices rose, shouts of command, bursts of gunfire, then silence as the fight drained from the canyon. The ambush was shattered, but Jodie didn't relax. She stepped forward, scanning the ridge, machine gun heavy but steady in her hands. Every nerve still buzzed with the possibility of another threat, another shadow in the smoke. She reached the body of the RPG gunner she'd cut down earlier. The launcher lay beside him, unfired. She nudged it aside with her boot, eyes narrowing. If he'd fired that shot, she wouldn't be standing. Echo 6 wouldn't be standing. The entire canyon might have been a grave. Her jaw clenched. She turned away, tightening her grip on the M249. Behind her, Victor Kane's voice crackled through the squad net. Ragged but alive, Walker. Jesus Christ, you just saved all of us. Mason Reed's voice followed, steadier, waited with awe. Keep pushing, clear the last of them. She's got us covered. Jodie didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was raw, her lungs torn from the smoke and strain, but she didn't need to speak. Her weapon had already spoken for her. She looked down at the canyon, at the men who had once called her just a driver, and for the first time their eyes met hers, not with dismissal, but with respect. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide was broken, and Jodie Walker had broken it. The ridge stank of burned fuel and blood. Jodie stood over the 7 bodies she had cut down, smoke still curling from the M249's barrel. Her chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, lungs tearing for air. Below, Echo 6 pushed deeper into the canyon, clearing enemy nests one by one. But the fight wasn't over. Gunfire still cracked from deeper positions, stubborn fighters refusing to yield. The radio in her ear spat Mason Reed's voice. "Walker, fall back! You've done enough! Get to cover before you're cut down!" Her eyes narrowed. Done enough? If she fell back, the pressure would vanish. The enemy would regroup, rally, pin Echo 6 again. They'd be swallowed all over. She clenched her jaw, ignoring the sweat burning her eyes, ignoring the sting of blood along her arms. She wasn't done, not until they were broken. She keyed her mic, voice hoarse, negative. "Walker, that's an order. Then court-martial me later," she snapped. "Right now, I'm not moving." She slung the M249 tighter and started forward. The slope fell away under her boots as she descended from the ridge, smoke wrapping her like a cloak. Each step jarred her battered body, but her grip never loosened. She vaulted a rock, slid down a cut of gravel, boots kicking sparks. A muzzle flashed ahead. Instinct yanked her down. A burst of rounds shredded the rock above her head. She rolled, came up firing. The M249 thundered, tracers ripping through the haze. One fighter shrieked as rounds tore through him. Another stumbled, blood spraying from his leg. The survivors ducked low, returning fire, bullets whistling over her shoulder. She pressed forward. Step, fire, step, fire. The weapon rattled, brass raining at her feet, smoke choking the air. Her belt emptied. She dropped to a knee, ripping another box from her vest. Her fingers shook, slipping once before she slammed the belt into place. She yanked the charging handle, hissed as it burned her palm, then rose again. Another burst ripped from the muzzle, cutting down the last of the cluster. Their bodies sprawled across the rocks, rifles clattering from limp hands. She exhaled hard, but didn't stop. The canyon walls echoed with violence. Echo 6 had surged halfway up, but their fire was thinning. She could hear the desperation in every shot. Men running low, magazines half empty. She couldn't let the enemy breathe. She pushed deeper. Bullets sparked around her, whining past her ears. One clipped her thigh, tearing fabric, burning flesh. She staggered, teeth gritted, but forced herself upright. Ahead, another group of fighters scrambled into position, 5 of them clustering behind a rock outcropping. They hadn't seen her yet, too focused on Echo 6. Her chance. She raised the weapon, steadied her breath, and unleashed hell. The burst tore through the cluster, 2 men collapsing instantly. The others shouted, scattering for cover, but she walked the muzzle across them, cutting them down one by one. When the belt ran dry, the slope was silent again. Her arms shook from the strain. Her shoulder screamed from recoil, but her eyes burned with fire. She advanced further. The enemy must have realized by now this wasn't just a supporting gunner on the ridge. This was death itself, walking straight into them with a belt-fed monster. They tried to counter. New fire lashed from the left, snapping past her. She dove behind a rock, heart pounding, chest heaving. The SUV's wreck was far behind now. She was alone in the thick of it, but she wasn't afraid. She slammed another belt into place, rose and fired. The burst shattered their line, tearing 2 fighters apart. The survivors fled, diving down the canyon slope. Her throat tore with a scream as she pressed forward, firing again, chasing them down with tracers. Below, Echo 6 surged with her momentum. Victor Kane's shout echoed up the canyon. "She's clearing them! Move! Move!" They pushed, fueled by her fire, carving through what was left of the ambushers. Jodie kept pressing. Her vision tunneled, each target appearing like a ghost in smoke, each burst cutting them down. Her uniform clung to her, soaked with sweat and blood. Her boots slipped on gravel, knees buckling, but she forced them steady. Her arms trembled from recoil, but her grip never broke. Another group appeared ahead, 3 fighters dragging a wounded comrade. She aimed, squeezed. The burst cut them down where they stood. The belt clicked empty again. She slumped against a boulder, chest heaving, head spinning. Her arms screamed for rest, her shoulder raw from the stock, but her eyes lifted. Another squad was regrouping near the canyon's mouth, 6 strong, pulling into defensive cover. If they held that line, Echo 6 would bleed out before reaching them. She pushed off the boulder, legs trembling but moving. She fed the last belt into the weapon, locked it in, and started forward. The ground shook with explosions as Echo 6 tossed grenades, rifles cracking. But the enemy squad ahead was dug in, their cover strong. Jodie broke into a sprint, the M249 heavy but alive in her hands. She charged through the smoke, bullets snapping past, one round grazing her side. Pain flared white-hot, but she didn't stop. She slid into position 20 meters from their cover, braced the bipod and opened fire. The burst slammed into them like a hammer. One fell, another staggered, clutching his throat. The survivors screamed, firing back desperately, bullets carving sparks around her. She shifted, fired again. Another collapsed. Another tried to run. She cut him down mid-stride. The last man hurled his rifle aside, hands lifted in surrender. Her finger hovered on the trigger, rage boiling, but she let the muzzle dip. He fled into the smoke, stumbling away. She exhaled, body trembling, barrel smoking like a forge. Behind her, Echo 6 surged forward, pouring fire into the last stragglers. The canyon echoed with final screams, final bursts, then silence. Jodie stood in the smoke, chest heaving, M249 sagging in her grip. Her arms trembled, her legs wobbled, blood streaking down her uniform, but the battlefield was quiet. The ambush was broken. She had refused to retreat, and because of that, they had lived. For the first time in 3 hours, the canyon breathed silence. Smoke hung heavy in the air, curling off the wrecked Humvees and blackened rocks. The echoes of gunfire faded into distant whispers, leaving behind only the crackle of flames and the groans of the dying. Bodies littered the slopes, scattered like broken puppets, rifles slipping from limp fingers. Jodie Walker stood in the middle of it, M249 slung low across her chest, smoke still trailing from the overheated barrel. Her arms trembled under the weapon's weight, her legs wobbled with every step, but she did not let go. The machine gun was more than steel now. It was the only reason 12 men were alive. Her uniform clung to her, soaked in sweat and streaked with blood from shrapnel cuts. Her cheek burned from a grazing bullet. Her thigh throbbed where fabric was shredded and every muscle screamed, but her eyes burned brighter than the flames curling from the SUV wreck behind her. She staggered forward, boots crunching gravel, until she stood on the edge of the canyon floor. Below, Echo 6 was regrouping. Victor Kane pulled his helmet off, sweat dripping down his shaven head, eyes wide with disbelief as he scanned the ridge where Jodie had stood. Mason Reed barked orders to check ammo, secure the perimeter, his voice steadier now but thick with exhaustion. Ethan Cole crouched beside a wounded comrade, hands shaking as he tightened a tourniquet. When they looked up and saw her, really saw her, the silence deepened. The driver, the girl from the motor pool, the one they never thought twice about, and she had just turned the tide of their annihilation. Kane was the first to speak, voice cracking with raw disbelief. "Walker?" She met his stare, face streaked with soot, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The machine gun across her chest said enough. Reed took a step forward, lips parted, words failing him. Finally he managed, You stayed up there the whole time?" Her voice was hoarse, nearly broken. "Where else was I going to go?" The answer hit harder than any gunshot. For a long moment, no one moved. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, the smoke curling between them like ghosts of the dead. Then Ethan Cole broke it. His voice was low, raw, almost reverent. "You saved every damn one of us!" Kane swallowed, guilt carving deep lines into his face. "I called you a driver. Hell, I laughed at you. Treated you like you weren't one of us." He shook his head, eyes glassy. "But you stood your ground when the rest of us were already halfway dead." Reed nodded slowly. We underestimated you. That ends today." Jodie lowered her eyes for a moment, her hands tightening on the weapon's grip. She hadn't fought for their recognition. She'd fought because someone had to. But hearing them say it, hearing them see her, struck something deep. She took a step closer, boots crunching through the dust and blood. Her voice cracked but carried. "I'm not your driver. I'm your soldier." The words hung there, sharp and unshakable. For the first time they nodded, not dismissively, not as a joke. With respect, the battlefield pressed its weight around them. 38 bodies lay scattered, the air stinking of gunpowder, sweat and death. Flies already buzzed. The sun leaned west, staining the canyon walls with blood-red light. Jodie's arms sagged at last. She let the M249 hang from its sling, smoke curling upward like incense. She staggered back against the wreck of the SUV, her shoulder slamming into the scorched metal. Her legs threatened to give way, but she locked her knees. Reed crouched beside her, his voice softer than it had ever been. "You disobeyed orders, Walker. You stole a weapon, left the base without clearance, risked court-martial." She met his eyes, steady despite the exhaustion. "And?" He exhaled, long and slow. "And if you hadn't, we'd all be corpses right now." Kane stepped forward, chest heaving. His voice was low but firm. "It's more than that. You didn't just save us, you broke them. 38 men, entrenched and waiting for us. You tore them apart." The number hit her like a weight. 38 lives ended by her hands. She had fired until her arms went numb, until her barrel glowed, until the bodies fell silent, and she'd do it again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They didn't give me a choice." Reed shook his head. "No, you didn't give them a choice." The canyon seemed to nod with him, the silence heavy, oppressive, but alive with truth. Jodie slid down the SUV's side until she was half sitting against the ruined wheel well. Her weapon rested across her knees, smoke still drifting from the muzzle. Her chest rose and fell like a drum, but her eyes never shut. Kane crouched beside her. "You good?" She smirked faintly, bitter, exhausted. "Define good." It almost made him laugh, but the sound stuck in his throat. He placed a hand on her shoulder instead, heavy and steady. "You're one of us now. That's all that matters." The others nodded, one by one. Even Ethan Cole, still pressing gauze to a wounded soldier's side, lifted his gaze and whispered, "She's the reason we're breathing." For the first time, the weight of survival settled in. Relief, disbelief, respect. It all hung thick in the smoke. Jodie leaned her head back against the SUV, eyes scanning the canyon one last time. The bodies, the wreckage, the silence after the storm. Her voice cracked as she whispered, almost to herself, "It's not over, not yet." And it wasn't. Because beyond the canyon, the world would demand explanations. Command would demand answers. And Jodie Walker would have to face them all, carrying the weight of 38 dead enemies and 12 living brothers. But for now, for this fragile moment, she had given them life. And the canyon, soaked in blood and silence, finally bowed to her. The ride back to Camp Resolute felt like traveling through another world. The SUV Jodie had driven was gone, left burning in the canyon. Echo 6 split themselves among the two damaged Humvees, engines coughing smoke, tires wobbling, frames groaning as they crawled over the rough terrain. Every bump threatened to shake the vehicles apart, but they kept moving. Jodie sat in the passenger seat of the lead Humvee M249, balanced across her knees. The machine gun felt heavier than it ever had, its steel biting into her bruised thighs, the sling cutting into her raw shoulder. She didn't care. Her hands clung to it like it was part of her body now. No one spoke. Not at first. Victor Kane sat opposite her, helmet in his lap, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. His mouth opened once, closed again. Words failed him. Ethan Cole cleaned blood from his arms, his hands trembling. Not all of it was his own. His gaze flicked to her every so often, eyes tight, as though trying to reconcile the driver he'd dismissed with the warrior he had just followed out of hell. Mason Reed sat behind the wheel, silent, his eyes fixed on the road. But every so often he glanced in the mirror at her reflection, jaw clenched, guilt carved deep into his face. The convoy crawled the 8 kilometers back, each minute stretching like an hour. When the gates of Camp Resolute finally came into view, something unexpected awaited. The entire base was waiting. Word had spread through the radio chatter, through the scraps of communication that had leaked during the firefight, through rumor carried faster than any official report. Soldiers lined the route, silent, weapons slung, eyes wide. They watched the battered Humvees roll through the gates, watched the survivors of Echo 6 sit slumped in their seats, and they watched the small woman in the front passenger seat, soot-streaked, bloodied, weapon balanced across her knees. Jodie felt their eyes burn into her. Not mocking, not dismissive, something else, recognition. The vehicles halted in the motor pool. Colonel Laura Hendricks stood waiting, arms crossed, her sharp gaze cutting through the smoke-stained air. Beside her stood Colonel Blake Patterson, expression unreadable, and a line of senior officers, their uniforms immaculate against the backdrop of battered survivors. "Dismount," Hendricks ordered, her voice carrying like a rifle shot. The soldiers of Echo 6 obeyed, boots hitting the ground one after another. Jodie slid out last, legs trembling, but she forced them steady. She stood with the machine gun still slung, chest rising and falling, blood streaking her sleeve. Hendricks stepped forward, her eyes swept across Echo 6 counting heads. Then they locked on Jodie. "Private First Class Walker," she said, her tone like steel. "Step forward." Jodie obeyed, boots crunching across gravel. She came to attention, though every muscle screamed in protest. The M249 hung at her side, too heavy to lift, but she refused to drop it. Hendricks circled her slowly, eyes scanning the soot on her uniform, the cuts on her arms, the powder burns on her hands. She stopped in front of her, voice cold. "You violated multiple regulations today. You left this base without orders. You took a weapon without authorization. You disobeyed direct commands." The silence behind her was suffocating. Jodie's throat tightened, but she forced her voice out, steady and low. "Yes, ma'am." Hendricks's eyes narrowed. "By rights, I should have you in irons. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge." Victor Kane took a step forward, fists clenched. "Ma'am, silence, Sergeant!" Hendricks snapped. Kane froze, jaw tight. The colonel's gaze bore into Jodie's. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Hendricks's tone shifted, softer but sharper. "You also engaged and neutralized a superior enemy force. You prevented the annihilation of Echo 6. You saved 12 American lives." She paused, letting the words sink. "And you did it alone." The silence cracked. Murmurs rippled through the assembled soldiers. Hendricks reached into her pocket and pulled out a brass insignia. She held it up, the metal glinting in the sunlight. "I'm told," she said slowly, "that Sergeant Kane called you just a driver. Is that correct?" Jodie's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Hendricks turned, pinning Kane with her gaze. "Sergeant, would you like to revise that assessment?" Kane swallowed hard. He stepped forward, boots snapping together, spine rigid. His voice rang out clear and loud. "Yes, ma'am. Private Walker is not just a driver, she's a soldier, she's a warrior, and I was wrong to ever say otherwise." The air shifted. The murmurs grew into applause, hesitant at first, then stronger, rolling through the ranks of soldiers who had gathered. Hendricks raised her hand, silencing them. She turned back to Jodie. "Private Walker, you are being recommended for the Silver Star with Valor device. Your actions today will be recorded, studied, and remembered." She paused, then continued. "You are also being reassigned. The 75th Ranger Regiment has requested your immediate transfer." The words hit Jodie like another explosion. The Rangers, elite, legendary. Everything she had once dreamed of when she enlisted, everything she had been denied because she didn't fit the image they wanted. Her voice cracked despite herself. "Yes, ma'am. Very interested." Hendricks allowed the barest flicker of a smile. "Then report tomorrow morning for your new assignment. Outstanding work, soldier." The applause rose again, louder, rolling through the motor pool like thunder. Soldiers who had once laughed at her, ignored her, dismissed her, now clapped until their palms stung. Jodie stood frozen in the storm of it, her body trembling, her weapon heavy in her grip. Specialist Rojas stepped forward, holding something in his hands, a case. He opened it, revealing the M249 she had carried into the canyon, cleaned, polished, a brass plate affixed to the stock. PFC Jodie Walker, 38, Camp Resolute. Her breath caught. She reached out, fingers brushing the cool steel, the engraved letters burning into her memory. Rojas's voice was low, steady. Command approved it as a presentation piece. "You earned it. And if you're going to the Rangers, you'll need a weapon you already know better than anyone." Jodie's throat tightened. "Thank you, no," Rojas said, stepping back into salute. "Thank you." One by one, Echo 6 stepped forward. Reed, Kane, Cole. Each came to attention, saluting her, the woman they had once called just a driver. Kane's voice cracked as he spoke. "It's an honor to serve with you, Walker. Hell, it's an honor to have been saved by you." She returned the salute, her hand trembling but steady enough. For the first time she believed it. Dawn broke cold and sharp over Camp Resolute. The air smelled faintly of diesel and dust, the kind of scent that clung to every outpost, every forward operating base. For most, it was just another morning. For Jodie Walker, it was the end of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. Her quarters were nearly bare now. The small bunk where she had collapsed exhausted after routine shuttle runs looked stripped, the sheets folded with mechanical precision. The locker that had once held her motorpool coveralls stood open, empty but for the fresh set of fatigues laid out neatly, the patches still stiff against the fabric. On her bunk lay the M249 in its case, polished, silent, waiting. Next to it rested the brass-inscribed plate that had transformed a weapon into a legacy, 38, Camp Resolute. Jodie pulled her boots tight, the leather stiff against bruised ankles. Every muscle still ached from the fight in the canyon. Her thigh burned with the graze from the bullet. Her arm throbbed where shrapnel had torn through flesh, and her shoulder felt like one giant bruise. She ignored them. Pain was proof she had survived. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Victor Kane standing stiffly, helmet tucked under his arm. He looked older than he had days ago, as though the canyon had carved years into him. For a moment, he just stared, lips pressed together, before finally speaking. "You leaving?" "Orders say report this morning," she replied quietly. He nodded. "To the Rangers." The word hung between them, heavy. Jodie shouldered her pack, the straps digging into sore muscles. She glanced at the patch in his hand, the insignia of Echo 6. He held it out to her, his expression solemn. "Command approved it," he said. "Honorary member, because you bled with us, because you saved us when no one else could." Her throat tightened as she took it. She rubbed her thumb across the cloth, feeling the rough stitching. It was more than fabric. It was acceptance, belonging, something she'd wanted since the day she enlisted. "I'll wear it with honor," she said. "We know you will." Kane stepped back, then snapped a salute, crisp and perfect. She returned it, her hand trembling slightly, then lowered it with a faint smile. Outside, 3 vehicles idled. Lieutenant Mason Reed stood at the lead, arms folded, expression stern but not cold. Ethan Cole leaned against the second, his usual grin absent, replaced by something softer, more respectful. Reed's voice carried as she approached. "You didn't think we'd let you make this drive alone, did you?" Her brow furrowed. "This isn't necessary." "It's not about necessary," Kane answered, coming up behind her. "It's about respect. You drove into hell for us. The least we can do is drive you to your next post." She swallowed hard, unable to answer. Instead, she climbed into the SUV, placing the M249 carefully on the seat beside her. The convoy rolled out, engines rumbling, dust trailing in their wake. The drive was long, the road stretching through barren hills and endless scrub. Jodie stared out the window, watching the land slide past, but her mind wasn't quiet. Every flash of sunlight on stone reminded her of muzzle fire. Every plume of dust became the ghost of smoke rising from the canyon. Beside her, Reed finally spoke. "You know, I passed you every day for 9 months, said nothing more than a nod, never asked who you were, what you wanted, what you were capable of." He paused, his hands tightening on the wheel. "That was my failure, not yours." She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I didn't need words, I needed a chance, and you took it," he said simply. The convoy pressed on, the silence between them not uncomfortable now, but heavy with understanding. Hours later, they reached the Ranger training facility. The compound loomed ahead, barbed wire gleaming, watchtowers casting long shadows in the morning sun. This was no forward operating base. This was a crucible, a place built to strip men down to nothing and rebuild them into something harder, sharper. The vehicles halted at the gate. Soldiers in crisp uniforms approached, eyes narrowing as they saw the battered Humvees and the ragged survivors who stepped out. Jodie climbed down last, the M249 case in her hand, the Echo 6 patch clutched against her chest. Her boots hit the dirt, and she stood taller than she ever had before. The cadre waited inside the gate, a line of instructors, faces like carved stone, eyes assessing every movement. At their head stood a master sergeant with 30 years etched into his scars, his stare cutting through her. "Private Walker," he barked, voice granite. "Yes, Master Sergeant, I've read your file. Impressive firefight for someone with 9 months of service. But this isn't a 3-hour battle. This is months of the hardest training the Army offers. Most men twice your size wash out in the first week." He stepped closer, eyes scanning her small frame, the cuts on her arms, the dark circles under her eyes. "You sure you belong here?" The silence stretched. Echo 6 stood behind her, watching, waiting. Jodie tightened her grip on the M249 case, the weight familiar now, almost comforting. Her mind flashed back to the canyon, the roar of the gun, the heat of the barrel, the faces of men who would be dead if she had faltered. She remembered the salute Kane had given her, the patch still pressed to her chest. Her voice came low but steady, every word hammered with conviction. "I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do, where I don't belong, who I'm supposed to be. I'm not here to prove anything. I already know I belong. The only question is whether you're ready to find out what happens when you give someone like me a chance." The Master Sergeant stared at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Fall in, Ranger candidate." Her chest tightened, her throat burning. She straightened, stepping past the gate. The patch of Echo 6 still clutched against her. Behind her, Reed's voice rang out, clear and steady. "Make us proud." She didn't turn back. She didn't need to. She knew they were already proud. Inside the gate, the instructors waited, eyes cold, ready to break her down. She lifted her chin, her stride even, her grip firm on the case. The canyon was behind her, but it wasn't gone. It was carved into her, part of her, 38 enemies dead, 12 brothers alive, and one truth etched forever. Warriors aren't defined by their assignments. They're defined by what they do when everything falls apart. And Jodie Walker had already proven she was one of them. She stepped into the compound, the gates clanging shut behind her. A new battlefield awaited. The story of Jodie Walker does not end at the gates of the Ranger Regiment. What happened in that canyon? What happened on the road back to Camp Resolute? What happened in the silence after the firefight? Those moments rewrote more than one soldier's understanding of courage. They redefined what it means to belong in a world where assumptions can be as deadly as bullets. For 9 months, she had been invisible. A driver, a shadow in the motor pool, the quiet one everyone overlooked. Men who lived by rank and regulation saw her as a background figure. She was the person who carried officers from building to building, the one who checked tire pressure and filled tanks, the one they could forget about until they needed a ride. To them, she was just a driver. But in one brutal morning, all of that changed. 38 enemies had been waiting with an ambush meant to swallow Echo 6 whole. 12 Americans were seconds from being wiped off the map. And when every second counted, when regulations and authorization would have come too late, Jodie Walker chose to move. She stole a machine gun she was never supposed to touch, climbed into a vehicle she wasn't supposed to leave the gate with, and drove into fire she was never meant to face. The decision should have destroyed her. Instead, it made her. From the ridge, she laid down fire with a precision and ferocity no one expected. Every belt she emptied meant another soldier below survived. Every time she reloaded with trembling fingers, she bought them another chance to push forward. When her SUV burned, she fought on foot. When her body screamed for her to stop, she advanced closer. And when an entire flank of enemy fighters tried to regroup, she walked straight into them and tore them apart alone. By the time silence fell, the ambush was broken, Echo 6 was alive, and Jodie Walker had become something else entirely. She hadn't fought for recognition, but recognition found her anyway. Soldiers who had dismissed her saluted her. Officers who had ignored her put medals in her hand. A regiment that once would have laughed at her name requested her transfer. Yet the real victory was not in the medal, not in the reassignment, not in the applause. The real victory was in the shift that spread through every witness of that day. Men who thought warriors had to be tall, loud, and broad-shouldered now understood that resolve, skill, and courage could live in any frame. Commanders who once judged by first impressions now carried a new example in their minds. The quiet driver who saved an entire patrol because she refused to stay in her lane. Her father's lessons from Montana echoed louder than ever. You don't wait for permission to do the right thing. You act, you fight, you prove. And that is what makes this story more than a tale of war. It is a story of defiance. Defiance against expectation, defiance against doubt, defiance against the limits others tried to place on her. Jodie Walker walked into hell with nothing but a machine gun and the will to hold the line, and she came out not only alive but transformed. She proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate your choices. She proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is not firepower or numbers. It is the determination of a single soldier who refuses to break. So when she stepped into Ranger training, she didn't arrive as just another candidate. She arrived already forged in fire, already carrying the weight of lives saved and enemies defeated. The cadre could break her body, they could push her past exhaustion, they could strip away everything she thought she had left. But there was one thing they could not take, the truth that she had already been tested and found unshakable. And as she marched past the gates, Echo 6 standing behind her one last time, the lesson of her journey spread far wider than that base, that canyon, or that regiment. It became a living reminder for every soldier who heard her name, because somewhere, in every platoon, there is someone overlooked, someone dismissed, someone put in a box and told they cannot. And every one of them now carries the story of Jodie Walker, the driver who wasn't just a driver, the soldier who wasn't just a soldier, the warrior nobody saw coming until it was too late. Her journey is proof that assumptions can kill, but courage can save. Proof that rules matter, but sometimes lives matter more. Proof that when the moment comes, greatness does not ask for permission, it acts. So when you think of Jodie Walker, don't think of her behind the wheel of a base SUV. Think of her standing on a ridge with fire in her hands. Think of her refusing to retreat when everyone else would have. Think of her with the Echo 6 patch pressed to her chest, walking into Ranger training with scars on her skin and fire in her eyes. Think of the warrior no one expected. Because sometimes the most dangerous fighters are the ones you never see until the world is burning, and they are the only thing standing between survival and death. And that is how a quiet driver became a legend.